All right, today we're going to proceed on to basically to Unix compilation. We'll talk a little bit about how we compile things inside of Linux, and then you'll see that it can get pretty tedious. So after we learn how to do compilation, we're going to go and learn a tool called make, or makefiles, which is a very handy tool to simplify the whole compilation process for us. And then we'll talk a little bit about system architecture and Valgrind, which will be a helpful tool. And then, we'll have lab 3 and then, or lab 2, sorry. And that should be it for today. So let's go ahead and get started. In Linux, there's a philosophy that everything is represented by a file. There's a couple things that can't be represented by a file, but in general, everything is. You can actually open a file to write to your screen, open a file to write to the network, open a file to write actually straight to memory if you needed to as well. That's just the Linux philosophy in general. Programs can use disk files, serial ports, et cetera, et cetera. Right, so if you write to a printer, you open a file. You want to write to serial ports, a file as well. As we learned last time, it has a name, modification, permissions, so you can actually set who's allowed to use each device. Stored in a file's inode. In OS, you'll talk about inodes, but that's simply a place where to store the file's metadata or its information, which is a special block and can contain other information about the file as well. All right. Directories are files. In Linux, they're called directories. In Windows, you call them folders. All a directory is a file that points to other files. Yep. As I think talked about a little bit, last class, everything begins in slash. In general, /home is the directory that contains all the home users or standard users that are on the system. If I were to go over to Xeon right now, I did an ls on home, you would see a whole list of all the users that have been created for our network. In general, or by convention, home is where users are stored. You are allowed to change it, but it's usually not a good idea. Bin is for programs, I'll call binaries. Etc is for configuration. Lib is for your libraries. In Windows, these are called DLLs. In Linux, they're called .so or shared objects. And dev is where all your physical devices are. Great. Okay, so it's laid out something like this. Probably very familiar if you're coming from Windows, except for change the slash into C drive /, and now it should be basically the same idea, just laid out a little differently. I believe Windows uses the word users instead of home for where it stores its user data. And it stores its binary, I think, in Windows somewhere else. I can't remember the exact one. All right, if you really need to go the old-fashioned way, you're not going to have to do this, hopefully for this class, but you are allowed to mount different components under your system. What that allows you to, what mounting is basically you have, well, maybe not a CD-ROM drive, but most people will probably use a USB stick at some point. You can plug it in. If you're virtualized, make sure you actually select to forward the USB drive to your virtual machine. Then you can use mount in order to mount it or in order to access it. And the way you do that is you mount from the device, which is in this case dev sr0, to the actual directory, in this case mount CD-ROM. If you're using Ubuntu, it will automatically do this for you, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you're using a different distribution, keep in mind that mounting is usually done manually, which is usually what I do in my class. Dev console, all right, it's the active console, aka what you're looking at right now. TTY. You want to know what TTY stands for? It's the teletypewriter. So way back in the day, the output, yes, well, teletypewriter, so it's the electronic typewriter. Have any of y'all used a typewriter? Ooh. Or is that ancient technology? Oh, okay. A couple still. What's that?
Kinda. I know someone who has like typewriters.
Was it the electric one where it actually was charging, or was it the old school one where you had to hit the key really hard in order to make it happen?
I think it was the old school one, but I haven't seen enough of them to know.
No, in the, I think 60s or 70s, they made it so you could just lightly touch it and it would like shoot the key up for you. But in the older ones, you had to go, really fast. All right. So tele meaning it's electronic, and if you think about it, the old screens, that's what they were. They were just electronic typewriters, and basically everything is stemmed from that. That's why TTY still exists. It's really an artifact from the 70s? Yeah, the 70s. It's just a name. Dev null, yes, my favorite device. Anything written to dev null is instantly discarded. So if you're getting a lot of output that you just don't want to listen to, if you pipe it or dump it over to dev null, it'll actually ignore everything that you have. So for example, ls, etc, too much information. All right, it's gone. So this can help sometimes if you're trying to keep your screen clear or it's just too messy. All right, tmux. We are going to use tmux, but we are not going to be able to get to it today. The beauty of tmux is we can all be editing the same screen at the same time, which allows us to basically take turns on who's programming, which I found to be really helpful to make sure everyone's on task. Unfortunately, I found out this morning that VirtualBox has made a couple of changes recently, so I will have this set up for next class. Okay, let's go take a pause and talk about compilation.